Welcome to ACOP's Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast Season 2, where we talk to leaders across our fellowship with the purpose of building connection and engagement. I'm Kim Cooper, your host and ACOP Next Gen Catalyst. Join with me as we continue to hear stories each episode from leaders across our fellowship that will challenge and encourage you in your ministry journey. Welcome to Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast. I'm happy to introduce today Reverend Dale Anderson as my guest. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Reverend. Ooh.
Reverend, yes.
Good to be here.
Dale, you get to hang out with me for a little bit.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to
it. So am I. So, hey, Dale, tell us a bit about you. There'll probably be quite a few people listening in today that don't really know who you are. Tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm 61. Don't look at me like that. I'm still young.
Hey, I'm not one to talk at this point.
61. I was born in the U.S., lived there for about 10 years, just outside the San Francisco Bay Area in a small town called Livermore. Mm-hmm. And in the late 60s, the San Francisco Bay Area was wild. Oh, I could tell you stories. So my dad said, I'm loading up the truck and I'm moving to Kelowna, BC. I mean, it was like moving me to the moon. It was.
How old were you?
I was 10 years old. Gosh, hardest move I've ever done as a kid. Yeah. So we moved to Kelowna, and that's kind of where I grew up, was in Kelowna, BC. Came from Kelowna. At that time, Kelowna didn't have a university. They had college extensions. Mm-hmm. And so I did a couple years of junior college, finished high school, junior college, came to Calgary to finish my first degree, which was a teaching degree. And it was in Calgary where I, attending church at Queen's Park Full Gospel. Mm-hmm. Harry and Joyce Roberts were the pastors, and Teen and Morris Fuller were the associate pastors, and Ernie and Barb Metz were the assistant pastors as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I attended. And Harry and Joyce had this daughter named Cheryl. And so I thought, well, she's kind of cute. And so, I just, one thing led to another, and we got married. I was so intimidated. Oh my gosh, Kim.
Well, I mean, it's Harry.
Well, it was her.
Oh, you were intimidated by her.
She was a registered nurse, already going in her career, high octane, and a manager. Already they were targeting her to kind of, bring her in and mentor her so that she would be like the head nurse of the hospital. Like already she had a leadership gift on her that was being identified. Mm-hmm. And so our first date was, and who are you and where are you going and what's your plan in life and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just going, I'm just happy to be sitting across the table from just like and the whole time I'm sitting there, okay, don't ask her to marry her. Don't ask her. She'll just be weirded out by that. So
she'll freak out.
And so she's, a teacher. Oh, okay. And so that kind of opened her up a little bit because she had grown up in a pastor's home and she wanted to get off that bus.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't every PK.
So when she saw that I was going to be a teacher, she thought, okay, well, this has some promise. And one thing led to another, and we've been married 36 years.
And then you became a pastor.
And then here I am. I mean, we truly believe in Jehovah Sneaky. We truly,
right?
We truly do. I mean, we had this plan, right? We were professionals. She was a nurse. I was a teacher. We were going to have our kids, have our house, have it paid for in our 50s, And the Lord just kept interrupting our lives.
That.
Oh man, you got to watch out.
Yeah.
If you sign your life away to him, it'll be an adventure. He's not going to leave you out, he's gonna use you, And so anyways, yeah, so she thought, okay, this is awesome. I got the right guy, and now here I am pastoring a church. We every day I look at her and I just go, Cheryl, I'm pastoring a church. And she just rolls her eyes. And and we have 2 kids. Our son, Jordan, was born into our home in the natural, normal way. Our daughter, Bethany, was brought in through adoption. We adopted her from Romania in 91, just after the wall came down, the Eastern European wall, but they're our kids. I mean, I
Yeah.
have two grandkids, that there is a God in heaven who believes in justice, because my son has two children, and his son is the oldest, his daughter is the youngest, just like mine were,
Mm-hmm.
about the same age difference, just like mine were, and they are just like mine were.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is awesome.
I
And
love
he's
it.
chasing them around just like I chased mine around. And
Yep.
so,
My dad
yeah,
used to say the same thing that every grandparent says. If I knew that grandparenting was so wonderful, I'd done that first.
yeah, totally. Yeah. So in that, Calgary is has been kind of like family home. Most of our relatives and family are here. I mean, we've got a lot to stand out other places. So we've come and gone from Calgary.
Mhm.
When the kids were young, we did 7 years in Poland during the 90s,
Oh,
which
wow.
was an amazing experience. It was just amazing. And then came back from that, and we're here 2 or 3 years when the Lord really opened the door for us to move to the United States, which
Mm.
Cheryl, she says, okay, good. You're a school teacher. You're not going to be a pastor. And second thing is, she said, I will never, with her finger pointed at me, I will never raise my children in the United States. And so here in 2003, we move our 15-year-old son and our 12-year-old daughter to Kansas City, Missouri.
Never say never.
Never say never. And so we were there. What captured our heart and was really kind of like, for me, the shift to ministry was the International House of Prayer in Kansas
Okay.
City.
Mhm.
And Cheryl had a brother that was there. He knew our hearts, and he knew where we were at spiritually and what we were about.
Mhm.
And he said, you guys got to come and look at this. And we got captivated. And so
Wow.
we moved down, served there for 16 years in various different leadership capacities and teaching the word, working at the Bible school, leading internships and so forth.
Yep.
So that was kind of like my shift to ministry. Had to raise our own support. The ministry doesn't pay its people. You raise support as a missionary. That was a wild, wild ride.
Yep.
Convincing people that I live in America and you should pay me money so I can go and work in ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah, go move to Poland. Go be somewhere over there, and I'll
Yeah.
give you. But
Yeah.
so, yeah, and so the kids kind of moved out of the house from there. Not
Mhm.
kind of. Jordan did. He got married and moved to Spokane, Washington, which is where I was born. So random.
Oh.
And Bethany went to culinary arts school and became a chef, cook, and then did that for several years. When she then answered the Lord, she knew from a very young age that
Mhm.
she was going to be in missions somewhere.
Mhm.
And so that's when she looked for a program, and it just seemed right that she goes to Perth. And so she was there for a full year and then was on her way back when COVID hit. And so
Okay.
she lives with us. Jordan is with his family in Spokane. Jordan's 33, will be 34 this year. Wow.
Wow.
And Bethany is 30, will be 31 this year. And
Wow.
here we are,
Here you
so we
are.
moved back north to Calgary
Mhm.
in November of 2019. So
Wow.
yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell.
I love it. I love it. I think when I've had conversations with you, I always love how you talk about your beautiful wife and the twinkle in your eye when you talk about her. And I know that your story, you guys have had some rough times, um and yet you always talk about how faithful God is and your call to ministry. And I think sometimes there's this terrible misunderstanding that if we're in the will of God and we're following what he's calling us to do, that everything will be perfect and everything will be lovely. And that's just not often how it goes.
Nope.
No, no. And so I love listening to your story. And it also really speaks to my heart because I've gone through some similar situations. And so I wanted you to share what you would like to share about your guys' testimony through Cheryl's diagnosis and how that's even affected your walk with the Lord, even your call in ministry, and even just continuing to minister through hard times. Because
Yeah.
I think that'll really encourage our listeners today.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Cheryl and I have an agreement. We've always been an open book. We've shared our lives and our hearts with people. We don't try to create a distance, I'm a pastor, I'm a leader, and you're you. And that
Right.
we're just folk, we're just common folk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was very obvious. Cheryl's last work assignment was as a hospice nurse, so taking care of the dying.
Yeah.
And she was doing that in Kansas City. And towards the end, it ended because of her diagnosis. She was diagnosed in January of 2019 with early onset stages of Alzheimer's, which is
Wow.
like a big kick in the gut. It was just
Yes.
like neither of us expected that. She was
Wow.
58 when she got the diagnosis. So early stages, there's not a ton of support
No.
governmentally or societally. I mean, everybody does their best, right? And we lean on the Lord. We don't lean on governments and so forth, but we'll take what's available.
Right.
But there's a lot available for seniors who get touched with that, who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Not a whole lot for early onset stages, simply because they figure they're young enough and they're still with their families in some capacity.
Yeah.
And so there's not a ton of resources to help the families for early onset.
Right.
So it took her out of her career. It ended her career.
Wow. Devastating.
That was hard for her.
Yeah.
And such a smart lady. I mean, I can balance a checkbook. Cheryl can take 2 pennies, rub them together, come up with $2,000, and then go give it away. Right. So, like, she had this way,
Wow. A
she just had
pastor's
this.
gift. I wish I had that to offer.
I saw, you know what? I saw my wife take offerings where people would turn their wallets upside down and dump whatever's in there. Like
Wow.
I mean, she would be the most prophetic when she was talking about God's desire to advance his causes and purposes,
Yes.
and that he had given us the resources to help pay for it. And
Wow.
people would just like, "Pwah." I just go, can you do that next week too? I mean, it's like, so it when she started to exhibit different symptoms,
Yeah.
we started this long journey of trying to get a diagnosis, because they tried everything. They were wanting to make sure there was no stroke, brain bleed, all that
Right.
sort of stuff. And so they finally came down to it was a cognitive issue and diagnosed her.
Wow.
And it was just so hard. It was a big thing.
Yeah.
you know I just believe God's shoulders are big enough. I mean, he created the world. I get to stand on that world he created. His shoulders are big enough for all the why questions.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to spin my wheels and get stuck in the mud,
Right.
because I just feel he's already been so kind to us that he's offered us salvation. And the way I look at it, these eternal purposes that he operates with, that he functions with. If we understand his eternal purposes in all things that happen, I'm not saying that all things come from God. I'm just saying that whatever happens can be handed over to him, and
Mm-hmm.
he can weave his magic with it. He can weave something out of it, a tapestry that is beautiful, that is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Managing the diagnosis is hard on multiple fronts. I hope I'm not sounding like a sob story, but it's just, when you lose a loved one to death, it's over. It
Right.
might be abrupt, it might be unexpected, but it's over.
Yeah.
With Alzheimer's, it's continual cycle of losses,
Yes, it is.
one loss after another.
Mm-hmm.
And for a person who is high cognitive functioning, right, who is normally really smart, really sharp, and right there, I mean, which she was.
Mm-hmm.
She did an IQ test as she started her nursing career. She tested out in the 95th percentile. So 95% of people are beneath her, right?
Wow.
That's kind of how you read that score.
Right. Right.
And it's completely flipped now. It's
Wow.
opposite.
Yeah.
And so it was such a kick.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just one continual loss after the other,
Yes.
and so
Yeah.
decrease, level off,
Yeah.
decrease,
Mm-hmm.
level off. And then those that are around caring, it's walking through those decreases,
Mm-hmm.
because you set a routine, right, to manage life.
Mm-hmm.
And then a decrease comes, and now you got to reset the routine
Yep.
to manage that new decrease. It's just a constant
Mm-hmm.
state of, just depending on the timing of it, of just loss, decrease, readjustment, and then facing the next ones.
And the grieving. of each loss.
And
Like,
that's the hard thing, right?
yeah,
Here's the hard thing is now Cheryl's at that place where she doesn't really notice the losses that much.
right. Yeah, it
We
does
do.
come to that point. Yeah. And that's when it becomes less hard on them and more hard on us.
On
And
us.
I totally hear you. My mom has dementia as well, and even just my grandmother did as well. And yeah, it's tough because you never know when it's the last time they'll do something.
No.
And it's kind of the opposite of when you're raising young children.
Yeah.
And, you grieve as they get older and they lose, the little things that they did.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
never know when it's going to be the last time you sit and snuggle on the couch, or the last
Right.
time they have the speech impediment, not able to do their R's, or,
Right.
and so it's kind of that opposite of it. And yeah, how have you managed the grieving process and working through the heart part of it while still leading in your ministry and the call that God has on your life and your family's life, but managing the balance between that? How have you done that?
Let me add one more variable, because you gave all the variables that I have, right?
Yeah.
But let me add one more variable, which, you know, it's neither here nor there. It's just another variable,
Yeah.
right? But the reality of, for 16 years working at the International House of Prayer, my function was hours in the prayer room during the week, and then functioning as a leader in whatever capacity that they had called me to lead, right?
Yeah.
So the leadership part, okay, great. That's what I'm doing now. I'm still doing leadership. I lead
Yeah.
my home. I'm a husband in my home. I'm a father. I'm a pastor. So those variables didn't change, right?
Yeah.
One of the ones that I'd never anticipated, right? I don't know why I hadn't thought of it, but is that I was called, as a part of my function in the house of prayer, to be in the prayer room functioning as an intercessor 25 hours a week.
Wow.
And over 16 years, we can go and calculate the math, whatever that is, right? On an average week, month, yearly basis, that creates a capacity in a person.
Right.
And 24 hours a week is the average of about 5-6 hours a day.
Wow.
In the place of prayer, which
Wow.
deeply impacted my life, brought a spirit of revelation on my life that, it's one of the greatest gifts I've ever received, and we all have it. It's just when you're there for extended hours of time, it increases. It's like a muscle that gets pushed, it gets built, right?
Yes.
And now I'm pastoring a church where, let's just say, we don't have that.
Right. Well, and the tasks that you have to finish in a day don't leave a whole lot of time
No.
for what fills your soul and helps you to walk
Right.
out
Right.
the heart
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. So, so I have to constantly, the reason I'm bringing that variable in is because I have to constantly remind myself I'm in a different place, different assignment. The calling hasn't changed, right? I'm still called to pray and study the word, but I'm in a different assignment. And now I have to fight through. I literally do have to fight through, in my heart, in my mind. Does this still count to you? Because I'm not giving you 24 hours a week. I'm giving you this. Does it still count to you in your eyes? Right?
Wow.
Is it still valuable to you in your eyes?
Yeah.
And I know that it is.
Yeah.
But man, sometimes what gets hit in your head, the radar that goes off in your head, it just tries to cheat you and lie to you.
Yeah.
And so you really gotta know the Lord, and especially in moments of suffering, my main way that I hold my sanity, that I keep my heart for God, that I stay tender, because my goal and desire is, I'm always learning. I've committed to lifelong learning. I started as a school teacher, teaching middle school. I committed myself to lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And so I just said, the last thing I'm going to learn how to do is die, no matter what age I do it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly learning. And so it was a while ago, the Lord talked to me about his eternal purposes. In other words, the why behind what he's doing.
Yeah.
Why this? And he
Mm.
gave me three things that I anchored my heart to. And the moment I anchored, this was pre Cheryl's diagnosis.
Okay.
We had other pressures, right?
Yeah.
So Bethany almost died when she was a little girl. We did a deathbed vigil. That's another completely different story. And I recognized through that, I had to, through the difficulty and the suffering of life, because suffering was going to come,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to anchor myself to something that was real. I
Right.
could not anchor myself to my popularity, my fame, my teaching gift, my anointing of whatever I could or could not do, right? I
Right.
couldn't anchor it to those things. Those things ebb and flow.
Yeah.
And so he showed me three things. Ephesians 1, then he said that he's trying to gather together in these two realms, the heavenly realm and the earthly realm, in one person, Jesus Christ. And so that meant my life was to be Jesus centric.
Yes.
Everything about Jesus. Jesus is at the center of everything.
Yeah.
And so I look for that, right? I even study, that's in my Bible study program. When I do my own Bible study, Jesus is at the center of it. Where's Jesus in this passage?
Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing is he showed me John 17. So that was Ephesians 1, John 17. The last 4 or 5 verses, Jesus is praying the night before he goes to the cross. And he says, Father, that they would be one, even as you and I are one, as I am in you and you are in me. And so I realize another purpose of God is whatever we face in life, if we will receive it, every experience we have is to bring us into greater oneness and agreement with the Godhead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing he prayed at the very end, last 2 verses, he said, and Father, I pray that the love with which you loved me and I loved you would be in them.
Hmm.
And so 3 things in God's purposes. He's Jesus centric, right?
Yeah.
He's bringing me into greater oneness and greater agreement with himself, with the Godhead. And he's what he's wanting to do is impart into me the ability to love like the Godhead loves one another.
Wow.
Loving myself, loving him, loving others, loving my world, right? And so as when I keep these 3, I'll call them eternal purposes, the why behind his what,
Yeah.
then actually I have found, and it's hard sometimes to get yourself focused and get yourself worked into it.
Yeah.
I don't say that there aren't emotional moments. I
Right.
don't say that there aren't meltdowns. I'm not
No.
talking about that. I think it's what's the final word, right? What's the fallback line? Where are you going to stand, right?
Yeah.
And I stand on the fact that he loves me and that he's calling me to a deeper level of agreement. And this experience that I'm going through has an eternal weight of glory. My faith to him is precious in his eyes, and he's refining me that I would come to a deeper level of agreement, a deeper level of oneness, a greater level of love like what is in the Godhead, and that I would be Christ-centric. It would be all about Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I've worked it through any sort of suffering, and quite frankly, any sort of blessing, because trouble doesn't come just through suffering and difficulties. Difficulties can come through blessing as well. Well, I was in Kansas City. I mean, in the last 10, 15 years, there have been different places that have had a visitation from the Lord, a periodic visitation. Toronto in the 90s, Pensacola, all these different places. Well, Kansas City, we had an awakening for 12 months, 11 months, I'll say 11 months, just to be more conservative. Many people got healed, dramatic healings. I could tell you stories.
Yeah.
And we had meetings every night of the week except one.
Yeah.
And so this time of visitation came out. I'll tell you, we had as many problems and as many pressures and as many difficulties with that kind of grace on us as we did, when we were under some of the most difficult conflict moments. So I think it was summed up best. Kim, I'll just give it like this. Cheryl and I did a prayer walk around our neighborhood, more recently. I just get her out and walk her around, and sometimes we pray. And we were coming around the corner that's by our house, and she saw the red door of our garage. And so it was kind of like all of a sudden, boom, she was there for one lucid moment.
Beautiful.
Right. Yeah. No issue with her speech. It was just like, she's there. Right.
Yeah. Love it.
And she prayed this prayer. Lord, this is my final prayer that I pray. I pray that to these good people in this little circle in which we live, that we would be salt and light of your love, whether through blessing or whether through suffering.
Wow. So good.
it just cut my heart.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
she went back to stumbling over her statements. That clear. And I just thought, that's the word of the Lord right there.
It is.
That's salt and light of your
So
love,
I
whether
love
through
it.
blessing or whether through suffering.
I love it. Thanks for sharing. I
Yeah.
think we'll all, if we haven't already, we'll all go through our blessing and our suffering and really having those centric, Greg and I are just finishing a preaching series on Christ-centered church, Christ-centered
Yeah.
family. We've done
Beautiful.
a sermon series. And
Beautiful.
so, yeah, I think that's where we have to go. That's what we have to have our foundation on. And
Yeah.
that's the only thing that is immovable and
Yeah.
unchanging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, we have a gathering coming up for our next gen. And we have asked you to come and share with us an encouragement to our next gen leaders. And when I say next gen, we focus in on leaders between the ages of, in their 40s and under. And a lot of those leaders are already leading. Some of them are just coming into their calling. Some of them are trying to find their place. And so we've asked you to come and give an encouragement. And so I wanted to spend some time in our podcast today, just giving a little bit of a teaser of what you want to share at that gathering and what you feel on your heart the next gen leaders need to hear right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. you know, um, I'll use a couple of words, maybe explain them later, but
Yeah.
we are in some pretty significant times.
Yeah.
That's not being prophetic. That's pretty obvious. That's pretty obvious. Um, and I'm a student of revival, and I don't think we realize in the church and in our generational shift that we're experiencing right now, I don't think we realize how primed we are for revival. We still
Mhm.
have a few things to work through before we get there.
Mhm.
But as a student of revival, I've looked through the different cycles of the most significant revivals that have happened since Jesus died on the cross and went to heaven, right?
Yeah.
And we are pretty primed. And so the cycles that are very common for society and culture, we're in those cycles, right? And the Lord really wants to do something, and it's in those moments where those transitional shifts, especially with the next generation, need to be recognized.
Yes.
And often what happens is that in the midst or in the beginning stages, I kind of refer to it a little bit like a boiling pot. As the bubbles at the bottom of the pot begin to emerge, the pot's not boiling yet,
Yeah.
but you could see the bubbles emerging. There's a lot of cultural pressure.
Yeah.
And in that cultural pressure, you often find what I will call the negative side of the messengers rising up. In other words, every generation is to carry a message. That
Right.
message is to come from God,
Mhm.
and from receiving it from God by spending time with God, having a prayer life, right? And so forth. But then there's the negative side where it comes out more as a justice statement against
Mhm.
things that are really true and not right, you know.
Mhm.
And the danger is that we allow that to be our message, and it
Right.
becomes actually a false justice message.
Hmm.
And so we are in those cycles right now. We're being
Yeah.
faced with more the negative messages of all the different justice issues that we are facing.
Right.
And probably if there was one common thread that I would say amongst all of them, which is a major issue for the next generation, that they've seen in their fathers, and are rejecting from their fathers because of the pain it created, is the false misuse and abuse of power.
Hmm.
And so my generation, I'm sad to say it, but in many ways, I won't say more than any other generation, but in pretty significant ways, misused our power at all levels,
Hmm.
right? At all levels, at the family level, right? We fathered poorly, we we were either non-existent, not engaged, or so overbearing and dominant and authoritarian that, we drove our children in one way or another, by either by our absence or by our overbearing nature. Churches, the same thing. Pastors and leaders, overbearing, insecure, and so trying to fight for their space, trying to secure their space for whatever reason, and so they fight with their people fight with them. Society, racism, all of the different issues that we see in society, misuse of power, finding the remains of countless hundreds of indigenous people in Canada in shallow graves, right? Misuse of power, right? Abuse of power. And it's being offered again to the next generation.
Right.
And are we going to drink the cup? Are we going to drink the Kool-Aid, as it were? It's a bad phrase, but nonetheless, and there's an example of a misuse of power, right?
Right.
But, or are we going to go in a different direction?
Right.
I find the church right now more concerned about its rights, rising up and demonstrating about its rights. We've become, this is my opinion, we've become far more political than we are priestly. We are called to be on our knees, impacting our society mostly through prayer and the proclamation of the gospel, not by huge demonstrations fighting for our rights so that we can claim what? So that we could speak what? So that we could show the light and the salt of what kind of character, right?
Right.
And so I could start quoting a lot of data, marriages within 5 years, in North America usually end within 5 years, one in two marriages. That's secular. Within the church, it's one in three, 1 in 4, and within 5 to 7 years. So it's not much better.
No.
And so, we know that these things we're facing, but I think the common thread is we're facing, and I think the Lord's disciplined the church. I don't think there's a ton of power in the church right there. There's enough to bring light and revelation, and we get a few healings just for the Lord to demonstrate, no, I'm still a healer.
Yeah, right.
There are many good things that are happening. I don't want to be negative, a bad, on poo-poo on things, but we're not seeing the revival. We're not seeing the power encounters that we're reading about in the Bible. And so what we'll do is we'll misuse our power and we'll go create a doctrine of barrenness so we don't have to worry about that anymore, right?
Yeah.
We'll claim that God isn't healing people anymore because then we don't have to worry about trying to reach for it or change our lives or whatever.
Yeah.
So we're masters at creating doctrines of barrenness in order to explain away our barrenness instead of repenting of our barrenness and getting on our faces before God.
Wow.
So when I consider this common thread, right? So all that to say, when I consider this common thread and I look at in the narratives of the Gospels, the proclamations of the prophecies of the Old Testament, and I see the prophecies of a Messiah who will have grace on his speech, that when he speaks, a spiritual window of opportunity opens up and somebody's healed, somebody's transformed, somebody's now living in light instead of darkness. And I see his leadership style is, if I go leadership style of where we're at in the church today, in society today, let's not even go to the church because, far be it for me to kind of poke at this, but let's just go society and culture, right? It's all about who's got more power, who's got more guns, who's got greater influence, who's got more money, right? And those are the people we're afraid of. And so we've got this huge fear of man issue that we're dealing with because of false power.
Yeah.
And I look at his leadership style.
Right.
And he stands there the day that he's an hour away from nails driven into his hands and feet. And he just goes to a man, you would have no power over me unless it was given to you. I'm good. Right? I'm good. I'm just, let me tell you the truth, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I am the Messiah. And I got a bunch of angels that'll come down and smack you guys all around and take me out of here. But I ain't doing it because I've submitted my life to my Father.
Right.
And I'm surrendered to his pathway.
Yeah.
My personal opinion, my thoughts and my prayers what the next generation needs is an understanding of what true power is, how to operate it from the soul, and to have a life that is submitted and surrendered and centric on Jesus Christ. And I think, a real revelation of the Father heart of God. And because of the timing of all of this, where we're at, I think a real revelation of eschatology, meaning a healthy understanding of, and not fighting and getting caught up in the minutia, but understanding the reality of where this is all going. I think those two or three things are really imperative, and that we not walk in forces in false power. And so what's really on my heart to share, just briefly at the conference is about Jesus's leadership style, which is mostly meekness and humility.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about meekness and humility.
I love it.
I want to talk about the ministry mindedness of Jesus, how he operated. He knew who he was, but he wasn't going around telling everybody, "Hey, everybody, come and listen to me. I'm the Messiah. So sit down and listen." He just lived it.
Yeah.
He believed in who he was and who his Father told him that he was.
Yeah.
And he received the empowerment given to him as a man on the earth from his Father by the Holy Spirit. And he surrendered himself and submitted himself to his Father, that he only did what he saw his Father doing, and led his disciples in meekness and in humility. That's all he really did. And the entire earth went running at him and nailed him to a cross for it.
Yeah.
It wasn't any of the miracles that got him in trouble. It's the fact that, I'm just being who my Father has called me to be. And every demon came screaming at him to try and get him to stand down from being who his Father had called him to be.
Wow.
And so I'm not called to be the Messiah, so I don't have to go and try and be that.
Nope. No. Thank
But
goodness,
John the Baptist, thank God. You wouldn't want that. But John the Baptist said it best. He said, the friend of the bridegroom, right? He says, I told you this before, John 3:26-27. He says, I've told you this before, right? He says, I am not the one, right? Yeah. But I am the one that's been sent ahead. So let's put that into the Anderson paraphrased version. What does that mean? I know who I am not.
Yeah.
And I know who I am. I'm not going to go and try and be and force something that I'm not when God hasn't called me to that, because I'm discouraged or jealous or envious because I don't get to be him. I'm going to take who God has told me I am, and I'm going to go be the best person that he's called me to be under this anointing, this calling. And I'm going to, what I'm going to do? I'm going to love him for it, and I'm going to submit it all to him.
Yeah.
That's what basically was John saying. I'm a friend of the bridegroom. I'm not the bridegroom.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to stand in between the bridegroom and his bride and try and turn his bride to me. I'm going to step out of between them. I don't own them. I don't own their relationship. I'm going to have a relationship with God, and I'm going to find my joy in standing before him. And so, John was meek. Jesus was meek. The apostles were meek, And as we say in America, they weren't running around as loudmouth punks trying to fight for their rights.
Yeah. And like what you said, those 4 words, the submission, the surrender, meekness, humility, those are very countercultural ideas.
Totally.
Right now.
Totally.
But yet we know that the kingdom is flipped. It's flipped from what we on this earth, the culture that we are pulled into, the kingdom is flipped. And so, just like Jesus said, the least of these will be the greatest, right? When the disciples are, who's the best, right? And so I love that. And I think there are definite pitfalls that we are falling into in the cultural environment that we're in, and it's being amplified by each and every situation that we are finding ourselves in. It's just growing in intensity.
Oh, and I call those intensity, though, I call that contractions, right?
Yes.
And so
that's a great way of thinking of it.
We get these contractions.
Yeah.
And dear sister, you know what it's like.
Sure do.
They start far apart. They're
Yeah.
real pains, but they
Yeah.
start far apart.
Yeah.
But as this whole delivery of something, this child, this life that's coming, right?
Yeah.
As this process keeps going, right? The contractions get closer together, right?
Yeah.
And they intensify in severity, right?
Yeah.
Until
Yeah.
you hit your transition moment and it's time to push and deliver this thing, right?
Exactly.
And so we're delivering something, right? I don't believe we're at the point, just because of certain signs and so forth, that we're at the point where Jesus is returning to the earth. I believe we are delivering a revival, though. I believe a revival is coming. That's the delivery that's coming.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you tell me, sister. I mean, I don't know. I watched my wife give birth to my son. It was pretty violent to her body.
Yeah.
I just went, ouch. I really love you.
Yeah. You're amazing.
You're awesome. And I mean, I'll just take one contraction.
Yeah.
Every messenger of a justice issue that does not lead us to the cross for reconciliation regarding that issue is preparing us for the arrival of the Antichrist. Because every justice issue is resolved at the cross. That's Ephesians 2.
Yeah.
And so if we're not led by our justice messengers, if we're not led to the cross, if we're led just to another chant, another riot, whatever it is. Now I get the decompression of how injustice decompresses. I get all that, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, our justice messengers must lead us to the cross. If they do not, then that justice issue will not get resolved, and we'll have another cycle of pain. We'll have another contraction of pain.
Contraction. Absolutely. Because you don't reach that transition into active labor.
No.
What's exciting to me is that we have the opportunity as the next generation to see something birthed.
Yes.
And so Dale and I want to encourage you to come and engage with us on March 27th at 4:00 and hear a little bit more about what Dale has to say about that. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say and to hear you unpack this a little bit more for us. And at this gathering, we're going to hear you speak, and then we're going to have an opportunity for there to be breakout rooms. And we're going to actually do our breakout rooms so that we're going to be mixing different leaders from across Canada and different provinces, different regions. And so it'll be an awesome time to pray together. And it's important that our next generation is preparing to birth this new thing. And as every parent knows, you don't just walk into that delivery room not ready. You need to prepare. You need to do some classes, and you need to pack that bag to take with you. And so we're preparing. And one of those things I think is learning how to be countercultural and to be kingdom minded.
Yes.
So my last question for you before we finish today is, and I end all of my podcasts this way: what does it mean to be ministry minded to you, Dale?
Ministry minded to me talks to me so much about my lifestyle.
Yeah.
I don't can I just say this? I was pastoring people before I ever became a pastor.
Exactly. As we all should be.
I was caring for the sick before anybody ever asked me to pray for the sick.
Right.
To me, ministry minded means that we actually take the Sermon on the Mount real, right? Yep. And we are salt and light in our world, as my wife prayed, whether in blessing or in suffering. No matter what pushback we get, we just live the values of the kingdom, and we walk in the empowerment of the kingdom, led by the Spirit. And that demonstrates, Romans 8:14. Those who are led by the Spirit, they are the sons and daughters of God, right? Yeah. To me, it speaks of a lifestyle. It's not just things I get to do, or a job description that I carry now that I've signed an employment agreement with a church and I'm their pastor, right? Yeah. It's my life. I was doing all those things before I ever actually got a job. doing it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's about our lifestyle, the way we live our lifestyle, and ministry flows from that.
Amen. I love it. Excellent. So if someone wanted to get in contact with you and explore some of what you've talked about, or just, reach out to you in some way, how can they do that?
Best way is my email address. So Dale, Dale, at CFG, so Calgary Full Gospel, so CFG.church. That's my email.
Excellent. Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
I really want to thank you for your time today. And I'm excited for March 27th at 4:00 Saskatchewan time. We're going to have a great time together and hear a little bit more further into what you're hearing the Lord say for this next generation. So thanks for your
Amen.
time.
Thank you so much, Kim.